Okay. This is session number 8 of Worldviews and Apologetics Introduction. We're looking at the various logical ways that have been invented by people to think of the universe that we're all a part of together. And this is the first part of a series that will take us into apologetics. Next week, we'll do the transition to the apologetics part of our package. Worldviews has been simply looking at the ways that people out there have or do think about the world. It's a whole system of how to make sense of everything that is. And most of the worldviews that are not Christianity reject the Bible and reject the God of the Bible. And they do that by way of a presupposition. They've simply decided they don't want anything to do with Christianity or with God, or particularly with the Bible, because that seems to hold them accountable for sin. And to get past that, they invent other things. It's often helpful to know where people are starting out in their adventure. When people come to us asking questions or wanting to argue or pushing their position in hopes of getting a reaction from us, this often means that the Spirit of God has begun working in their hearts. He's doing something with them. And we can respond with the gospel. But often it helps to know how to talk to them about whatever silly thing it is they have decided to believe, because often their positions are so crazy. Today we're going to look at the broad topic of polytheism, the belief that there are multiple gods. It is, on the face of it, nonsensical, but that doesn't keep lots and lots of people from holding this position. It's a classic position. It's been held since the very beginning of history. I believe that monotheism, the belief that there is one infinite, eternal God, is the original or classic worldview. Adam and Eve, obviously knew that there was one God. They didn't have doubts about that. Noah knew that there was one God. He talked to God. The Shemites, people coming from the line of Shem after Noah, obviously knew there was one God. In the other directions, those who went north with Japheth, those who went south with Ham, forgot their monotheism fairly quickly. And that's where we see the polytheism developing first. But the Semites, the sons of Shem, also developed polytheistic systems. The reason for that, I think, is because polytheism is storytelling. Let me show you what I mean by that. We'll share the screen here and get let's see here. That'd be this one. All right. Okay, so polytheism, the belief that there are two or more personal gods with distinct spheres of influence in the universe. And these gods are not beyond the world, but they are in the world and part of the world. Polytheism is not necessarily incompatible with pantheism. So in the Hindu religion of India. Of course, pantheism is the basic philosophical idea that everything is God, but within that are multiple contradictory gods. So Shiva and Vishnu, the gods of the underworld, and Krishna, and all of the rest of them. They're actually thousands. If everything is God, how can all these little gods be gods? It's irrational, but it is a system of thought. It's the way they go. Polytheists generally agree, all of them from ancient times right down into the modern world, generally agree that the gods had a beginning in time, but no end. So they're infinite in one direction only. Some hold that nature gives birth to the gods. Others hold that gods start out as men and grow into the role of being gods. I know those are contradictory and incompatible ideas, but they are still polytheism. Polytheism has a very long history. In the East, forms of Hinduism, Confucianism, Shinto, and Taoism are polytheistic. In the West, the ancient nature religions, which started out in Mesopotamia and in Egypt, were picked up by Greece and Rome, and they were polytheistic. The sculpture that you see here in the background comes from a Greek temple. Actually, I guess we would call it Greco-Roman. This one is in Asia Minor, and is the famous Temple of Zeus at Pergamum. And all of these characters that you see are gods. These gods are having a war with one another in the heavens. It's the original war where all of the gods got together and they couldn't agree on what to do next, so they created chaos. And out of the chaos, the various gods managed to rise to the top and defeat the other gods and make the world. It's frankly, it's a silly idea, but it lends itself to storytelling and great art. And so Greek art is often about the gods and the goddesses and all of their adventures. In the modern world, there's quite a lot of polytheism around. There's a major American religion that has over the last 50 years or so become worldwide, called Mormonism, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And they are quite literally polytheistic. They believe that God used to be a man, and if they keep their ducks in a line, when they finally get to heaven, they will become gods with their own worlds. They literally believe this. Mormons who get married in a Mormon temple are guaranteed that they and the children that they have after them will inhabit their own world as gods. They teach this. And this is the completely modern world. There's some other similar in the sense of being polytheistic. Scientology is actually a very widespread worldwide religion, particularly amongst the very wealthy elite, movie stars, financial upper crust people, the sort of people who would build $1 billion yacht, often are into Scientology. It pretends to be a kind of religion, but is actually a way for elite oligarch type people to connect with one another and make more money. There's an outfit called the Divine Light Mission that has gotten huge, and it is polytheistic. There are cults that are built around the occult and UFOs that tend to be polytheistic. They believe that the gods have come down in a variety of ways, and there they are. And then, of course, modern environmentalism. They're radical versions of environmentalism. We Christians are called to take proper care of the environment. We all know that. We shouldn't dump garbage in the river and those sorts of things. But the radical environmentalists go very much beyond that. They believe that the created elements are in fact gods. So trees and animals and whatnot are gods and or goddesses. They speak of Mother Earth. And you say, well, why would they say a thing like that? Well, they literally believe that the earth is the eternal giver of life to mankind, and elsewhere in the universe are other planets and other stars that are the mothers and fathers of everything else. The environmentalists are polytheists. And then a more recent one, I was just reading an article this morning. We'll look at this just a bit later. The modern emphasis on all the gender studies and the LGBTQ plus business is built on the idea that there is a continuity of the natural world and the spiritual world. There's a continuity of everything. There's no such thing as male and female. Those are just two stopping points on a very broad continuum that leads people from inanimate objects all the way into godhood. The central idea is that each individual is his own God, and whatever he can visualize for himself or herself or itself is true. So if I believe that I'm a unicorn, by simply visualizing that, I make that insane belief true. If I decide that I'm a woman, even though it's impossible to define what a woman is, if that's what I think I am, then I am, because I am the only God that I'm responsible for. And you, as yet another God in the pantheon, are responsible for you. And there are no higher powers. So it's a fascinating thing. Polytheism has a long, long history. It's not the oldest religious worldview. We know that monotheism is older, and there were representatives of monotheism all through the biblical period up to Abraham, when Judaism was introduced. Nevertheless, polytheism has very ancient roots in the Middle East. By the time of Hesiod, who is a Greek farmer and a poet, his poetry is really what we remember him for, wrote around the 8th century BC. And his poetry began when the daughters of Zeus. The term Zeus, by the way, is the Greek word theos. We use that word in the New Testament, and in the Old Testament in Greek, theos is the word for God. And the father of the gods, the greatest of the gods for Hesiod, was Zeus. So the daughters of Zeus, who of course were goddesses, Hesiod called the Muses, and they came to him to teach him a beautiful song. and they were the ones who inspired his books. The Works of Days, which is about farming and morality, and the Theogony, about the origin of the world and the gods. That's the one that I've taken some bits and pieces from. Hesiod is the earliest of the Greek writers to give us a full description in poetry of who all the gods are and how they fit together. It's the first logical presentation of what is, frankly, a very illogical worldview. So, what about creation? The Greek sense and the polytheistic sense is a creation out of chaos. The beginning of the heaven and earth was chaos. Earth and hell and the various gods come up out of chaos. Chaos itself had a beginning in a previous world, which is never explained. Heaven hid his children in their mother, the earth, because he hated them from their birth. Earth decided this was evil and plotted with a hitman by the name of Kronos to kill heaven. Verily at the first, Hesiod says, chaos came to be, but the next the earth, the ever-sure foundation of the deathless ones who hold the peaks of snowy Olympus, and then dim Tartarus in the depth of the wide-pathed earth. Okay, so Olympus is the mountain in northern Greece that is the traditional home of all of the gods. Tartarus is the polytheistic Greek name for hell. And all of the polytheistic religions have a kind of a heaven and a hell, but they're inhabited by all kinds of gods who are each responsible for their own thing. So Kronos was hired as a hitman to kill the children of heaven. Kronos was given a jagged sickle with which he ambushed his father heaven and chopped him into bloody pieces, which fell to earth and became a wide variety of gods. And the first generation of gods were called things like Furies and Giants and more than that. So chaos came first, then heaven and earth, as two opposite principles, and this is the bloody separation of the world that we know. The story really isn't very far different from the Babylonian creation myth, which we call Enuma Elish, in which the male and female gods quarreled, and the female hired another god to kill the male. His blood became, and her tears became the other gods in the created universe. And you ask, well, why was the female god, whose name was Tiamat, crying? Well, because she'd just become a widow. she hired a hitman, another god who's also not, there's no backstory on the other dog. His name is Marduk, and his job was to kill Tiamat's husband Apsu. So Apsu died, and his blood and chunks became the dry land and the freshwater oceans, respectively, and her tears became the saltwater oceans. It's all in good fun. And frankly, there's not that much difference when you come down to the principle. The Greeks and the Babylonians and all of the other people groups have very similar things. There are very few new ideas in the world, and Satan doesn't usually have new ideas. Following the emergence of the world from chaos, some of the gods emerged from the blood of heaven, and other gods emerged from the rivers and the sea and the stars, and these were the nature gods. Other gods resulted from the sexual activity of the gods, as was the case for Zeus, who was the greatest of the gods. Zeus was one of several children of Kronos. You'll remember the hitman from the first slide, and a goddess by the name of Rhea, who is not otherwise explained. And Kronos had heard a prophecy that one of his own children would dethrone him, which is interesting. That would be Zeus, of course. And so he began eating his own children, eating his own children. Who are these children? Well, we're not told, but Zeus is one of them, and Rhea is another. Kronos began eating them, and Rhea then gave Kronos a great big rock wrapped up like a baby god, which Kronos swallowed whole. And then he went to the earth and vomited up all of the other gods. And these regurgitated gods then joined Zeus in a revolt against the otherwise unknown group of gods named Titans, who were on Kronos' side in the battle. I've got a note here in my notes that you can't make this stuff up. It's literally, this is it's irrational, it's inconsistent, it's there are internal contradictions all over the place, and yet this was the system that the Greeks came up with. And the Greeks were building on ancient Middle Eastern uh, uh, prior systems. So Hesiod seems to be saying that the universe itself, the primordial universe, was eternal until it was somehow differentiated or made into different bits by the birth of the gods. And so the present world order is finite. It had a beginning point. All right. How about man in all of this? Well, what's really interesting is that in polytheism, the gods are exalted men. So Zeus looks like this big guy with an eagle. The other gods and goddesses look like very handsome men and very beautiful women. It's just the way it goes. By the time of Hesiod, the gods had created 5 generations of man. The sequence began when the deathless gods of Olympus made a golden race of men. The next generation was of silver, far less noble, and they were followed by a bronze race sprung from ash trees. They were despicable and loved to go to war under Ares, the god of war. The 4th generation, for some reason, were vastly improved, and this was a heroic race of god-men. And these participated in the great battles of the Trojan Wars that were celebrated by Homer and in a book called the Odyssey and another called the Iliad. Hesiod believed that he was a part of the 5th generation, also made by Zeus, which was a race of iron, which never rested from their labor day and night. Hesiod thus had a very low view of men. Strangely, he was even harder on women, whom Zeus created, he says, to be an evil for mortal man with a nature to do evil. So this is not a good thing. Speaking of evil, let's continue Hesiod's story, because he had to explain the problem of evil. every philosopher and religious thinker really has to explain the existence of evil in the world. The Bible explains it very well. Satan tempted Eve, Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, and that's the beginning of not merely sin in the world, but of mortality, and is a good enough explanation. The non-Christian or non-biblical religious systems have to come up with an answer. And what they came up with is that evil began in the very beginning um, with the gods themselves, who are essentially a mixture of good and evil. The specific story that Hesiod produces is about a god named Prometheus, who is deceived by Zeus by stealing fire and giving it to man, or he deceived Zeus by stealing fire. Where did he get the fire? Well, Zeus had it in heaven, I suppose. And the discovery of fire, according to this, was a sinful thing. In response, Zeus planned sorrow and mischief against man. So he ordered the making of a woman named Pandora, who was given a large jar filled with plagues of various kinds and told to keep it closed. Being a woman, Hesiod tells us, she opened the jar and released all the plagues of trouble and war and unfaithfulness. So, yeah, this is something that continues to be published into the present day. If you like to read Greek mythology, it's still around. Ethics. Essentially, whatever Zeus declares to be right is right. Whatever he says is wrong is wrong. Zeus is completely arbitrary. Those who live according to what is right will be rewarded. Evildoers will be punished. So ethics are completely arbitrary. There are no universal principles. Zeus, who is a combination of good and evil, comes up with whatever is right or whatever is wrong, and the rest of us just have to live with it. Hesiod doesn't try to explain that. Hesiod has a very pessimistic view of history. It seems that man just gets worse and worse, although the few who manage to do right are models for everybody else. The history of man is intricately linked to the lives of the gods. Man is rewarded or punished according to his deeds and will live on in some form after death. Hesiod had no concept of a final goal or purpose for history. He was convinced it was all about the gods who simply make everything happen. And it just goes on and on and on. There's no real purpose. Whatever the gods decide arbitrarily is the way that it will go. Ultimately, Hesiod makes for good storytelling. There's some interesting characters. When you look at the Greek and Roman gods, and earlier the Babylonian and the Canaanite and the Egyptian gods, the stories are similar. The things that have to be explained because everybody wants an explanation are simply broken down into individual gods. In the modern world, somewhat more modern world, I need to give you a little introduction to Mormonism. This picture is of Joseph Smith, the early 19th century founder of Mormonism. Smith was a con man, wonder worker, magician, who began having visions in about, where was it? Early 19th century, about 1830. He began having visions in upstate New York and was introduced to a character that he reported to be the angel Moroni, who eventually gave him a set of golden plates. Now, this is Smith with his golden plates. Now, just for the sake of information, an actual golden book of that size and shape would weigh about 80 pounds, about 40 kilos. It'd be tough to read, tough to work with. No one else has ever seen the golden plate. Smith claimed that these golden plates were written in Reformed Egyptian, which is a language that no one has ever heard of. And he translated these things into what is called the Book of Mormon. So today, the Mormons, or Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, are one of the fastest growing religions in the world. They're certainly the largest polytheistic religion in the world. By 1983, the Mormon Church's income worldwide was estimated at $3 million a day. So they're doing nicely from this beginning. Mormons tend to be hard workers. They have big families. And I know there are Mormons in the Philippines. They go as missionaries. There are quite a number of congregations in the Philippines. I know there are Mormons in Italy. They've not turned out to be as popular or widespread, but they're definitely out there. So, what did Joseph Smith actually experience? His visions began back in my notes here say 1820. With an encounter with two gods. He met God the Father and God the Son, whom Smith says were two separate gods. And they warned Smith not to join any current Christian denomination because they were all wrong. Their creeds were an abomination to God. Okay, all wrong, completely wrong. They've got nothing to do with anything. So Smith encountered an angel called Moroni, gave him the golden plates. And the Book of Mormon was the result of that. And it shows great similarities with the language of the King James Version of the Bible and with an unpublished novel that was available at that time about the peoples who lived in Central America. Aztecs and Incas and others, only it gives them different names. Officially in 1830, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints officially began. It became its own separate religious movement. The Book of Mormon is actually a story. It claims to be history about Jesus, one of the gods, coming to the New World, to Central America, and planting the true religion in the tribal peoples of Central America. And in the Book of Mormon are detailed descriptions of battles and migrations and the building of great cities, important kingdoms, all kinds of things. About 100 years ago, Christian archaeologists were going to the Middle East and finding all kinds of confirmation of biblical history. Mormon archaeologists trained at Brigham Young University about 100 years ago, began going to Central America. And today they remain the most professional and prolific archaeologists of Central and South America. The studies of the Aztecs, the Mayan culture, the Incas, the Toltecs, the rest of the great Central American pagan cultures have been very, very well studied by the archaeologists who come out of the Brigham Young University in Utah, Salt Lake City. And their professional qualifications are as high as anybody. Today, if someone were to come to me and ask where to go to school to study the archaeology of Central America, I would tell them, no question, go to Brigham Young University. They are the best. What those archaeologists have found as a result of nearly 100 years of professional research is precisely nothing. They're not a thing. They're not an artifact, not a language, not a kingdom, not a place name, not a road, not a mountain, not anything in Central American archaeology that has any correlation at all with the Book of Mormon. Modern Mormons find this a little embarrassing, but it hasn't stopped them from going on. So what do they teach about the gods? Why do I call the Mormons polytheists? One of the very earliest of the Mormon leaders was a prophet by the name of Owen Pratt, who claimed that there are an innumerable number of gods. He was the second president of the LDS Church. And he could not say how many gods there were, but he knew that there was never a time when there were no gods. The quotation from him, "Our Father in heaven was begotten on a previous heavenly world by his Father. And again, he was begotten by a still more ancient Father, and so on from generation to generation. Why do you seek for a first, when Revelation informs you that God's works are without beginning?" Well, the reason we do that is because the Bible, which is actually God's revelation, starts off with the phrase "in the beginning." That's why we believe that, but the Mormons don't believe that. Joseph Smith earlier on had made this position quite clear. All the people need to learn how to be gods, the same as all gods have done before them. For God himself was once as we are, and is an exalted man, and sits enthroned in yonder heavens. Okay, so that's a position. There are millions of Mormons around the world who are looking forward to becoming gods. The creation, in spite of the fact that Owen Pratt says there's no such thing as a beginning, the creation in the book we call Doctrine and Covenants took place when the head of the gods called a council of all of the gods. And here we see a Mormon conception of the council of the gods. And they got together and concocted a plan to create the world and the people in it. So we infer that God had materials to organize the world out of chaos. Chaotic matter, which is element. Element is pure principle, whatever that means, and can never be destroyed. They may be organized and reorganized, but never destroyed. They had no beginning and can have no end. So the gods are organizers and shapers of the world, not creators or causes of its primal existence, but the ultimate elements of which the earth consists are eternal. The same book, Doctrine and Covenants, argues that those who teach a creation ex nihilo, out of nothing, are fools and have not the gift of the Holy Spirit. The gods are just organizers. They shape things and make new stuff out of old stuff. Okay, the gods and their relationship to the world is fairly straightforward. There are countless gods and countless worlds. The one that matters most to the Mormons, of course, is the earth, but there are countless worlds all over. The gods who are on the earth are headed up by God the Father and his Son Jesus and the Holy Spirit, who are three separate gods among multiple gods. Early Mormons taught that God the Father was actually Adam. Most modern Mormons don't teach that anymore, but it's still in their books. Joseph Smith said, of Adam, he is our father and the only God with whom we have to do. Our father Adam helped make the earth. It was created specifically for him. He and his companions came here. He brought one of his wives with him. She was called Eve. So the story of Adam and Eve is picked up by the Mormons, but Adam and Eve were the first gods of this particular planet. That this earth was created specifically for Adam and his wives, but he only brought the one with him for reasons that are not explained. Jesus' purpose in coming to the earth in all of this was to provide a substitutionary death to exempt all of mankind from the penalty of the fall, so that individuals who obey the laws and ordinances of the gospel could be provided with a remission for personal sin. And he gave a great example to mankind on how they too can become like the gods. Okay, so Jesus is a good man who became a god and ended up with his own worlds. And Adam is yet another of the gods. And you too can become a god if you just keep your nose clean and follow the example of the gods who've gone before. Okay, what about man and all of this? So here's a typical Mormon family. Mormonism has a really, truly complex doctrine of man, including an eternal pre-existence in a spirit state. So when you're conceived, that's not a beginning. That's just one more step. He is born into mortality, but is still an independent, uncreated, self-existing being. So all men are potential gods. Man's life on earth is preparation for the rest of eternity, during which he will become a god and have his own world, along with the wives and children that he has acquired. So here we see grandma and grandpa and dad and his at least two wives there. There may be three, and any children who are the offspring of all of this activity. And there they are heading off into heaven, where they will populate their own individual separate world. Okay, evil. Yes, there is such a thing as good and evil. Evil or sin is anything that opposes the will of the gods. And you can only tell the will of the gods if you listen carefully at your Mormon meetings. Okay, ethics. The gods, and everybody can be a god, are the givers of moral values in the respective spheres in which they govern. So the world populated by a specific set of divine parents receive from those parents the laws by which they may live, and is different on every world. And if you keep your nose clean and become a god, and you take your wives and all your children and the grandparents with you to populate this world, you can make up your own set of laws, because it just doesn't matter. Although the moral laws of the spirit world are freely consented to by all the pre-existent spirits, they must be revealed to the men of earth. And this revelation comes through the Mormon scriptures, which include, one, the Bible, as correctly interpreted. And the Bible is only correctly interpreted by the Book of Mormon, the Pearl of Great Price, the Doctrine of Covenant, and anything else proclaimed by a Mormon prophet. I'm going to make a note here that, as with all the false worldviews, notice that the Bible can't be taken at face value. This is universal. The Bible has to be denied, ignored, interpreted, qualified. If the Bible is taken at face value as the Word of God, none of these other views stand. It just doesn't happen. Okay, where is everything going? What is this all about? What's it all about, Alfie, as we say? The Earth will eventually be turned into a grand celestial planet, fit for the sons and daughters of the particular gods of this particular planet. Okay, Earthlings who reject Mormonism will end up in a thing called a telestial heaven, a kind of hell or purgatory. Those who died without Mormonism but accepted in purgatory may go on to a thing called a terrestrial heaven, which is one step up from the telestial heaven. And they're really spelled differently, one with an L, the other with R's. And the terrestrial heaven is a nice enough place, but it's certainly not a place where gods would hang out. The highest heaven is reserved for those who were faithful Mormons. Now, this is the celestial heaven. So faithful Mormons who did all the Mormon stuff, gave their money to the church, get to go to a celestial heaven. And this is a pretty nice place, but it's still a heaven for regular people. And the layer above that requires temple marriage in a Mormon temple. So when a Mormon man takes his one or more wives to a Mormon temple to go through the ritual of temple marriage, they become actual gods and are given entirely new worlds to populate and to govern. Even after attaining godhood, the individual may still grow and develop and continue eternally toward perfection. They never quite get there because there's always a little something they can do to make up for it. Okay, that's Mormonism. It's really big, it's really powerful, it's really a fast-moving cult on the world scene. It's closely related to Christianity. And there are some very important Mormon characters in the American and larger world political scene who will confuse you if you listen to them. They talk about Christ, and they talk about Jesus being God, but they don't mean what the rest of us mean. Mormonism is the largest polytheistic religion on the planet today. Okay, in the popular world, there's a whole other kind of polytheism. And this is a guy I haven't run into. I don't know very much about him. I couldn't even find a picture of him. But Daniel Miller is an American who published in 1974 a book, The New Polytheism, Rebirth of the Gods and Goddesses. And what he is essentially saying is that the modern world would be happier if it would adopt all over again the ancient multiple gods theory. He argues that polytheism is alive and well in modern society and that this is a good thing. He argues that people everywhere ought to get in tune with the gods and to liberate themselves and be the kind of people that they really are. So it's a do your own thing, do it yourself polytheistic religion. So let's end up or begin with just a few of the elements. This is Miller. Monotheism is a concept that relies on classic rational thinking, what we sometimes call linear logic, in which concepts like true and false, right and wrong have some meaning. If any of this sounds familiar to you, it's because all people with common sense start there. But the modern world has discovered that such thinking is no longer necessary or fashionable. And we call this postmodernism. Next week, when we get started on apologetics proper, we're going to spend a little time with postmodernism and its characteristics. But the main point of postmodernism is that everything is relative, everything is pluralist. There's no such thing as male and female. There's whatever, all different. There's no such thing as right and wrong. Something may be right for you, but wrong for somebody else, and it doesn't matter. There's no such thing as true or false. Truth is always connected to the specific situation. And the modern world has bought this. Modern man, Miller says, finds himself in a world where truth and reality are relative. His life often feels anarchistic. That is, there are no rules, no horizons, no boundaries, no center to prove one securely close to home. Where did all of this start? This kind of thinking about relativism betrays the death of God as a concept. Friedrich Nietzsche, as a philosopher of the 18th century, German, who announced that God is dead, and we, the philosophers, have killed him. And he thought that was a good thing, and that would Nietzsche believed that the modern world celebrates the triumph of the death of God. But the death of God gives rise to a rebirth of the gods. Miller says we are polytheists. Polytheism is a situation in which there are various values, patterns of social organization, and principles by which man governs his political life. There's the politics. Here in America, we wonder sometimes why our modern political system has gotten so utterly chaotic, so utterly valueless. And here's the explanation for that. In fact, everything is relative. Although polytheism carries these different meanings, behind them is a religious situation. Religiously, polytheism is the worship of many gods and goddesses. At one time, polytheism reigned in the West. Miller tells us this was replaced by monotheism when Greek culture died out. In fact, he's entirely wrong, but that's what he thinks. Today, with the death of God, polytheism can again take its rightful place as a key to understanding Hinduism, the occult, magic, extraterrestrials, new forms of multi-family life, and other alternative lifestyles. And Miller sees this as a very good thing. So, what do these folks think about the world? This is a quote from Miller. The powers or potencies of the world are the gods and goddesses. Oh, okay, so they're not actually personal. They're just powers or potencies. These are constantly changing and often at war with one another. Okay, that's somewhat like the classical polytheism. They are not personal exactly, but also not without individual characteristics. The gods are those of ancient Greece because we are Western in outlook. Hindus and Buddhists have a different set of gods altogether, and that's fine. Miller gives examples of practical significance of the stories of Prometheus and Asclepius and Hera and the others. And those stories contain ancient truth about our psychic realities. In other words, they're good stories, they're not true, but they contain true ideas about our psychic reality, again, whatever that means. There is no ultimate truth. What is man? Man is the playground of the gods. So the gods are up there on Mount Olympus doing what they want. The gods parade through our thoughts without our control and even against our will. They live through our psychic structures. The gods grab us and we play out their stories. So the people who decide that they are actually not men anymore, but they're women in a man's body, just get to play out their psychic structures. Values. Are there any values in this thing? All values, be they truth, beauty, morality, or what have you, are relative. Truth, it depends. Beauty, well, it depends. Morality, well, whatever. The kind of thinking that separates values into good or evil, true or false, is monotheistic. What he's saying here is that if there is a single God, then truth exists eternally in the mind of God. Beauty exists according to a single standard. Morality rests on a single set of eternal values. They cannot be relative because there is one God, one anchor. Monotheistic values do not account for man's modern experience of ambiguity and relativity. Why is that? Because modern man has rejected God and all of God's values. Okay. So I've mentioned along the way that radical environmentalism and the LGBTQ plus whatever alphabet soup of sexual perversion. These kind of radicals are essentially polytheistic. So you've got Earth first, Mother Earth. Wow, Hesiod would appreciate this. Earth has to be first because Earth is our most recent mother. And all of the other hamsters and teddy bears and walruses and whatnot are also gods. And what is man? Man has no particular, anyway, Earth first. But also the LGBTQ thing. This man, he doesn't look like a man, doesn't he? He looks like a really, truly ugly woman. But this is a so-called drag queen who was posing at a library during a reading to children. This particular pervert believes in an essential continuity of all things. So the gods of the environment are mere extensions of mankind. Women and men are mere blips on the continuum, and sexual expression of any and all forms is the key sacrament of this faith in pagan reality. This is our modern world. Polytheism is perhaps an excellent description of what we're up against in this modern world. So some basic beliefs of polytheism. This is summarizes pretty much everything here. There are many finite gods in the universe. It's very important that the gods are finite. No one God is in charge of everything. And secondly, the universe is alive and active. The universe itself is kind of a God-filled living thing. Thirdly, the gods influence events in the world, which is at least somewhat true. supernormal events occur. Polytheists generally believe that the gods actually exist in the world and do things that are beyond the natural realm. So for polytheism, the belief in a kind of miracle is a part of the system. Man is an immortal spirit in a mortal body. And that's actually true. Ethics generally are relative and localized. So different strokes for different folks, different notions of right and wrong for different people in different places. Man is destined for immortality. And again, this is true. And then finally, history is the working out of the gods' activity. Multiple gods doing all of their chaotic stuff work out history, which is not particularly predictable. Okay. Some contributions. All right, and they do contribute a little bit to the conversation. There's a growing recognition that man is not alone in the universe, and this is manifest in the belief in the occult and extraterrestrials. The fact is, the demons and the ETs are not nearly as important as the one true God. But basically, man isn't alone in the universe, and that's true. Secondly, if there is a divine reality, it follows that man should discover what that is and how he can relate. So if the divine reality is that there are multiple gods, well, it follows that you should figure that out. You should also follow the logic if it leads you toward monotheism. Thirdly, polytheists are often praised for positing an analogy between man and the gods. It would appear reasonable to find characteristics of the creator in his creation. Okay, that's a small thing. Then fourth, polytheists have been commended for recognizing that there are forces within the world, some of which man can control and some he cannot. Okay, the environmentalists should be informed of that. However, there's some major criticisms of polytheism. The first is definitional. What is a god? If the gods are the offspring of natural elements, then they're not really ultimate beings. The term God means supreme being, and it's hardly fair to change the definition in the middle of the argument. So right from the beginning, anyone who is polytheistic is talking nonsense. How can there be multiple gods? There cannot be multiple gods because that's not what a god is, unless you change the definition. And if you're going to say there are multiple beings in the universe, well, of course, that's tautology. You haven't said anything. Where did all of these multiple beings come from? This leads us to the second critique, which is philosophical and scientific. That is, that an infinite series of actual things is impossible. So an eternal universe can't exist. A beginningless series of events in time simply isn't possible. Imagine an infinite library. A library with an infinite number of shelves and an infinite number of books. What would that look like? Well, it would fill an infinite amount of space. Well, okay, so you've got an infinite library. What if somebody publishes yet another book? Where are you going to push it or put it? If the library is already filling all the space that exists, where does another book go? Can you take a book out of an infinite library? Would you still have an infinite number of books? Well, of course, that's all ridiculous. There is no such thing. An actual universe has to have a beginning, and that requires a creator. a cause, who's sufficiently powerful and knowledgeable to do the creation. The micro gods of polytheism just can't do that. Thirdly, if the universe is not eternal, but came to exist from nothing, then it would seem reasonable to look outside the universe for an omnipotent creator. This is just logic. If the universe is eternal, then we've got the logical contradiction that's going on. So if the universe is not eternal, it came to exist out of nothing, which is the only real option, then looking outside the universe for an omnipotent creator makes good sense. The polytheists miss that. Fourthly, polytheism turns out to be a kind of silly anthropomorphism, trying to explain something big and difficult like the universe using simplistic human characteristics that people can understand. It makes for good children's stories, but not good philosophy. So the gods are really just really, really powerful men and women. Really? Frankly, it's a childish solution and should have been put away with the other toys of childhood. One of the great reasons that Christianity took over the ancient Greco-Roman world 2,000 years ago was that Christianity provided an infinitely better explanation of the world as it actually exists and the meaning of history. Polytheism simply doesn't do that. And it makes for better stories, perhaps, but the truth doesn't always make a great story, but it does make sense. Okay, I'm going to quit that. Let's see if I can stop the share. Yeah, there it goes. Hey, how about that? And I'm going to open this up so we can all talk again. I think we can all talk again. I can actually hear everybody, which is kind of a nice thing. Thanks for coming again on a Wednesday evening in Italy, on a Thursday. Is it Thursday morning or Wednesday morning in the Philippines? I know it's the middle of the night in the Philippines. Thanks everybody for being here. We'll see you again next Wednesday. We'll be doing the introductory lecture on apologetics. How is it that we defend authentic Christianity against all of these other worldviews? And specifically, how do we go about talking to people about Christ? What good is the gospel in all of this? Anyway, God bless everybody. We'll see you again next Wednesday. Love you all. Wish I could be there with you. All right.
Thank you,
Bye
Dr.
bye
Jan.
now. Ciao, ciao. Bye bye.
Ciao.
Brother Oscar, go get some sleep, my friend. Bye bye. Ciao, ciao.